Today, I want to continue our collection of sermons that we are calling Come Home, where for a few different installments, a few weeks here as we gather at church online, as we gather on Facebook, where what we are doing is we are examining the power and the implications of one of Jesus's most famous stories that, quite honestly, has been mistitled. It's a story that if you joined us for part one or you joined us online, in person, wherever you may have, you heard me say that we are calling this the story that Jesus told about two lost sons, because that's the way Jesus explained it. But most of you, and maybe more commonly, know it as the story of the prodigal son. Now, if you missed part one, I could not encourage you more to go back and watch it. It's available on YouTube. You can listen to it on the podcast. You need to get that in your life, but I promise you this. If you missed part one, I'm going to do everything I can to help you out and help you not be lost in part two, because we are just picking up where we left off. But real quick, let's set the stage for where we're at. We are in Luke chapter 15, where Jesus tells three consecutive stories about the losing of some things. He begins his first story talking about a shepherd who loses a sheep. He has 100 sheep, but he loses one. And he leaves the 99 that he has to go and find the one, and then celebrates when that lost sheep is found. Then Jesus tells a story about a woman who has 10 coins, and she loses one of the coins, and she sweeps her entire house top to bottom until she finds that lost coin, and then she tells her neighbors, her friends, everybody that I have found my lost coin, and she celebrates that thing. And then we get to the space where we have spent our time in part one, and we will continue to spend our time today. Jesus' story about two lost sons. Now, we sort of handled the first half, but for most people, it's the only part of the story they even know. It's the prodigal part, if you will. The way it goes is Jesus explains that there was a man who had two sons. And one of his sons, the younger one, came to his father and asked his father for his share of the estate that was going to come to him whenever his father would die. Only one problem. Papa ain't dead. And so this younger son, by coming to his father while he's still alive, asking for his share of the estate, is essentially telling his father, I wish you were dead because I really just want your money. In fact, what we learned for many of us who have this younger son mentality is that we're people who, from God, we want his resources without his requirements. Come on, there are places in your life where you want the resources that God brings. You don't want the requirements that go with them. And in those places, you are like this younger son. But astonishingly, the father grants this younger son his request and gives him his share of his estate. In fact, what he actually did is he took his estate and he divided it between his younger son, giving him what was going to come to him, and also giving to the older son what was his. Jesus' story tells us that this younger son then goes very far from home. And in this faraway land, he spends all of this money that he has accumulated, and he just sort of blows it trying to make friends and entertain people. And he finds himself at a certain point without any money, without any friends, without any relationships, and a famine hits the land. And so this younger son who's never had need, never had want in his life, goes and hires himself to someone. He just starts doing stuff for somebody. And that somebody decides to question the value of his values. And he takes this young, posh Jewish boy and has him go and tend the pigs. And it's there tending the pigs that this younger son kind of starts to think about how deplorable his life is at this moment. And he starts to think about how much money the hired hands in his father's house make. And he gets an idea. He decides that he can't go back to his house and be a son, but he can go back to his father's house and maybe get a job. And he thinks in his own intellect and in his own power that he can work hard enough to repay everything that he has taken from his father. And so he gets up and he heads back home. And then the part of the story that many people know, many people love, it's a beautiful moment in the story. It's the moment that some people think is the climax, but it's not the climax. When this father sees his son coming from a long way off and runs to him and hugs him and kisses him on his head. And he celebrates because this son of his was dead, but now is alive. He was lost, but now he's found. And so he calls for a robe, and he calls for a ring, and he calls for shoes for his feet, and they kill the fattened calf, and they celebrate in this moment. That is all what happened in part one. Today, Jesus continues this story, and now the focus is no longer on the younger son, even though Jesus' story continues. He actually turns it to the object he's had all along. Let's pick up in verse 25 of Luke chapter 15. Here's the way Jesus' story goes. Now his older son was in the field, and he came near the house. He heard music and dancing. So he summoned one of the servants, asking what these things meant. Your brother is here, he told him, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. Then, come on, somebody, you need to reckon. Then he became angry and didn't want to go in. So his father came out and pleaded with him. Now, we love to think of this older son honestly in very cleaned up and admirable ways. And there are some admirable qualities about him, as there are the younger son. But let's just start from the beginning and break apart some of what you may think. When in Jesus' story, it says that this younger son was out working in the field and came. You need to understand what was true of this older son. He wasn't working the way you think work would go on. All right? He was not out there digging ditches. This was not blue collar work. I think some of us picture this older son, just everybody's out there partying and he's just doing the work. No. No son of a well-to-do Middle Eastern man in that day would have found themselves working like that. This older son wasn't out there working like you would think. He was supervising. So he had spent his time out in the field supervising what goes on. And when he's done supervising some things, he comes to the house and he hears some noise. He can tell that there's a party going on in the house, but he doesn't know why. It wasn't a special holiday, but this feels like a holiday. What has happened? So he summoned a servant. He demanded someone to come to him and to explain what was going on. And this servant tells this older son that his father is sitting down with his younger brother and they are eating together. They're having this party. They have killed the fattened calf. Why is this significant? Well, in Luke chapter 15, verse 2, Jesus is actually asked by some religious people as to why he spends time with these despicable kinds of people. And so Jesus then very conveniently weaves in, as he is telling this story about the two lost sons, the reality that this good father, aka him, is sitting down and eating with the person they had called deplorable, sitting down and eating with the person they had called disrespectful, the person that they had said was a reprobate, who there was no good in him. Now the father is sitting down and eating with him. Jesus is firing shots right here, okay? Like he is coming at these people who had come at him, but he ain't done yet. This servant tells the older son that the father has his son back, his younger son back. And the way this translation explained it was that he has him back safe and sound. That's what we read. It's a way to say that this son has been received back, to use the Hebrew term, with shalom, with peace. What does that mean? Because it's clearly a very powerful turning point for this older son. The older son is simply curious as to what's going on. Tell me why there's a party going on I don't know nothing about. He don't know what's happening. But as soon as he hears who is back and what his father has done, he has welcomed him, received him back with shalom. The son gets angry. Why? Because what the father did by receiving him with shalom is he reconciled the relationship with his younger son. This younger son had left. There was a breaking in that relationship. But not the youngest son. The father was the only one who could reconcile this thing. And he had decided that this son is always my son. That's why it was so significant. Some of you will remember this from part 1. If you didn't, there's this part at the end of it where he says, bring me a robe and put it on him. Bring me the ring and put a ring on his hand. Bring me shoes and put them on his feet. What he is doing there is he is reconciling with his son. He is telling him, you are not going to be a slave. You are not going to be, you are my son. You always have been, you always will be, and I suffered so that you would have the opportunity to be my son again. The father reconciled with him. The problem is that reconciliation bothered the older brother. The older brother who decided not to plead the father's case with his younger brother when he was about to leave the first time. He recused himself from his responsibility. This older son who didn't have the same earnestness, expectation, or desire to see his younger brother come back, because the father, while the younger son was still a long way off, saw his son. He was looking out for him. This older brother never even took notice. This is why the older son is angry. He doesn't want that reprobate. He doesn't want that abandoner of the family. He doesn't want that selfish human being back with him. He's like a lot of people, you know? Because for some people, hear me out, do not miss this. I'm coming for you. For some people, grace is amazing when you get it, but it's appalling when they get it. For some people, grace is amazing when it's for you. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. But when somebody else gets that kind of grace, oh, we got problems with that. We are so quick to condemn and to criticize other people. Why? Because of what they did? That's what the older brother, because of what they did. Do you know what they did? Do you know where they've been? Do you know how they've acted? It's appalling to us that grace would come to them. It's amazing when it comes to us, but it's appalling that somehow, because they don't deserve it and you do. Shoot. Some of you need to recognize how ratchet your wretch really is. You need to recognize for a minute how broken and discombobulated, how utterly helpless, how ratchet the wretch that you are is, because you think way too good of yourself. That's how you can look at someone like the older brother did and be amazed at the grace that you receive, but be appalled that somehow they would receive grace. Can I tell you something? Just because you don't sin like somebody else sins doesn't mean that you won't drown in your own sin. So many of us love to point fingers and criticize and call out others for how they mess up, how they screw up, for what they've done wrong, when truly, we're all dead in our sin. And it's the continued sacrifice, the shamefulness that the Father continues to take on, that makes it possible for either of his sons to come home. Now, you may have missed this when we just read it, but in what we just read, the most shameful act that the Father does in all of Jesus' story just happened. Did you see it? See, so often what we are told is, yes, the Father humbles himself and he takes on shame by giving in and heeding to the request of his younger son and dividing his estate and giving him the money and letting him go. That shame came on him, and that's true. It was shameful when the Father had to go and defend his decision to people in the village, people under his care. It was shameful for the father when the older son wouldn't go and plead his case for him, so the youngest son went off. It was shameful for him. It was shameful for the father when every day he would stand on the hillside looking for his younger son to come home, and he never did. It was shameful for the father to run to go and get his younger son when he saw him, to pick up his coat and to run to his son. That was shameful, but nothing was as shameful as what he does right here. He comes out of a party that he threw to come and plead, to appeal with his older son. The reason this is so shameful in that culture is because it was done in public. He leaves this celebration. Remember, there's such a celebration going on that the older son doesn't even walk into the house. He summons a servant to ask him, what is happening up in there? They was partying, okay? Like they was partying. They killed that fatted calf, fajitas for everybody. Like they was throwing down, you know what I'm saying? So the father had the whole neighborhood, everybody that worked for him, everybody that was part of the family probably there, celebrating. But this son of his won't go in. Because this older son won't go in. Again, the father takes on shame to go out and appeal to his son. The father comes and does for his older son what the older son was supposed to do for his younger brother, but he wouldn't. That, my friend, is a picture of grace. Grace is, yes, it's when we get what we don't deserve. And sometimes us getting what we don't deserve, hear this out, is when we get what we could have given to others, but we didn't. We get forgiveness, even when we didn't give forgiveness. We get purpose, even though we chose not to give them purpose and we could. Come on, we get family, even though we pushed them away. That's grace. Yes, we get what we don't deserve, but that sounds so abstract. Sometimes what it is we get what we could have given to others, but didn't. That's what this older son received right then. Verse 29, let's carry on. Look at what happens. This older son, it says that he replied to his father, "Look, I have been slaving many years for you, and I have never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me a goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours," look what he calls his brother, won't even refer to him in their own kinship. "When this son of yours came, who has devoured your assets with prostitutes," making up stuff, "you slaughtered the fattened calf for him." Everything for this older son was about what he did. Did you see that? I have been slaving. That's what he said. But what's true is he hadn't been slaving. Because if he had been slaving, he wouldn't have been paid. But what did Jesus begin the story with? That the father took his estate and he divided it between them. This brother had been paid, okay? So this slaving is not really true. Sure, probably he'd been working hard. He'd been out there being a good supervisor, doing whatever he was told. That's fine. But slaving, baby, you better pump the brakes on that. I have never disobeyed your orders. You hear how he's talking about himself? He's like, it's me. I'm good. It's me. I did the work. It's me. I fixed it. I made it. I cared. It's me. Truth is, he probably had disobeyed his orders. Come on, you've been around anybody for a minute. You know you've disobeyed their orders every once in a while, right? But what he's trying to do is he's trying to build a case based on his own effort. He's trying to build a case based on his own worth. I think that sounds like a lot of us, doesn't it? It sounds like a lot of people who start to have a faith in God, who start to do this church thing, who start to become religious, as some people say. I'm going to be spiritual. I'm going to do, and we become like the older. Can I tell you when you're like the older? You see, we all have a place, you can write this down in your notes, where we think we've earned from God what we can only receive from God. You are like the older brother at any place in your life where you think you can earn from God what God can actually only give to you. Some of you believe that. You wouldn't say it because you know it doesn't sound right, but what you really think is you think your goodness is what has made you right with God. You think whatever good happens in your life is because you are good. I'm faithful. I'm strong. I'm good. Look at me. You're just like the older. And when you listen to yourself talk, just like when you listen to the older brother talk, there's so many problems with what comes out of your mouth. I could spend hours ripping apart his little monologue here, in all the inaccuracies, in all the terrible things that he said that just weren't true. But can I point your attention to the most vile and grave, the one that you probably struggle with too? It's how he understood his relationship with his father. His greatest fault, his greatest misstep was in how he understood the relationship with his father. Because it's clear from his explanation that he understands it as a servant to a master, not as a son to a father. He is clearly trying to earn whatever it is the father is going to give. Whatever it is the Father has given, whatever it is the Father might continue to give. He is not receiving it as a son, but he is trying to earn it as a slave would from their master. How do you, what do you see that? Listen to him talk. He's trying to talk about how I've done all the right things. I've obeyed all the rules. A servant obeys the rules because he's required to. If a servant doesn't obey the rules, they're no longer a part of the house. They get replaced. They get fired. They get thrown out. A servant obeys the rules of a place because they're required to. But a son obeys the rules because that's where they're loved. And this older son clearly has an understanding that he must obey the rules. He must do the right things because that is how he stays here. That sounds like so many church people that I know. Maybe even you, if you'd be honest. Come on, today, I ain't asking you to chat. I ain't asking you to type. You are welcome to, but I ain't doing it today because I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you today. We're going to type next week. Next week, we're going to type because it's going to be happy, love, love, love. This week, I'm coming for you. Because a lot of church people have turned what should be a response of the Father's love into a rule to keep you in the game. You know, gathering as a church, online and in person, that's a response, not a rule. It's a response out of love for God, out of desire to do what Jesus told us to do. We gather. It's not a rule, it's a response. But so is holiness. Oh, that's a word you don't hear very often, huh? Holiness is a response. A lot of people want to put holiness on people as a rule, acting like somehow they are holy. Bump that, they ain't holy. Holiness is a response. Be holy as I am holy, says the Lord. But it's a response because of love that you've received. Generosity is a response. I don't give anything in the church or as the church because I'm scared that if I don't give, God gonna send me to hell. That would be a rule. I give because God loved the world so much that he gave. And so my demonstration of my love for God is that I give. It's a response. Forgiveness, it's not a rule, it's a response. Why do I forgive? Because I've been forgiven much. Freely you've received, freely you give. Why do we operate with compassion? Why? Because we've received, it's a response. Why do we serve? Not because God's gonna beat us up if we don't, but as a response. They are rules if you think doing them earns you some sort of privilege, grants you some sort of right. But they're responses, really, when we do them because of the love that the Father has shown to us. See, God's love for you is not defined by what you do for him. His love for you is not defined by what you do for him. John said it this way in 1 John 4. He said, this is love, not that we love God, but that he loved us. And he laid down his life as a sacrifice for us. The older son, though, he believed he did everything right, didn't he? He believed he did everything right. I've never left your house. Everything you asked me to do, I've been doing. I've been here. I've been here. I've done it all. Which what he's saying in that is that he believed he deserved good because he'd followed the rules. Can I tell you what that is? That's pride. It's pride. You see, but that's pride. If you believe you're good enough or you can be good enough, then you don't need what the Father has to offer. You don't need his grace. You don't need what he can give because you can earn it for yourself. This parable brings evidence to two types of sinners: the rule breaker and the rule keeper. But both of them are lost if their relationship with the Father is broken. You can keep all the rules you want, but if your relationship with the Father isn't right, I don't care what rules you keep. You can break all the rules, but if your relationship will get right, you know what will happen? You'll start following the rules, but it'll be in response, not to get something. Which leaves us to where you may be today. Just like the older son. The older son had a perilous reality that so few people ever talk about. That's why your boy is preaching to you today. Because I believe there are some of you that are religious people. There are some of you that you are church people. There are some of you that you genuinely and sincerely try to do the right thing. There's a problem with you, though. You think because you're in the Father's house, you've got it right. Just because you're in the Father's house doesn't mean that you have the Father's heart. That is the reality of the older son. In the Father's house, he did not have the Father's heart. And the sad reality is there are a lot of people who call themselves Christians. There are a lot of people who, if you'd ask them, are you in the Father's house? Come on, are you part of the Big C church? Come on, has Jesus changed your life? You would say yes, you are in the Father's house. Some of you would even be as bold to say, I ain't ever left. Baby, I was raised in this thing. Come on, as a kid and then in high school, I didn't wander away in college. Baby, I stayed with it. I'm grown now. I've always been in. I don't care where you are. What the Father is asking you today is, do you have his heart? Because you can be in his house. You can be in his house and not have his heart. Is this true of you? Oh, come on, this is going to be quiet time in the chat. That's okay. Is this true of you? Because here's what's sad but truthful if it is. You probably aren't humble enough to even recognize it. I'm just being honest. Come on, I'm trying to help you. Because what you tell yourself is, man, I'm always in service. I mean, online or in person. I haven't missed a service in years. I understand. And somehow you think that means that just because you haven't missed the service, that somehow the Father's heart is in you. This older son is proof that those are separate things. You say, but I serve at every opportunity. I'm already signed up for the next grocery drive-thru. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to serve. That's great. We love you. We need you. But just because you serve doesn't mean you have the Father's heart in you. You're saying, I pray all the prayers. Come on, I read all the scriptures. You say, this is a good one. I never did all that stuff that those people did. Come on, I never wandered. I never went away. I never left. I never screwed up. You sound just like that older son. And you're failing to realize you can be in his house and not have his heart. And just like the older one, pride is preventing you from seeing the grace offered to you. You know that's what happened, right? Pride prevented the older son from seeing the grace offered to him. The younger son was in a faraway land. He was feeding pigs, these despicable animals that he was told never to touch. He was serving them and feeding them. And he decides, in my own strength, I can fix this. And he comes back to his father. But then grace met him. And when his father ran to him, when his father kissed him, all of the plans got broken down. All of the defenses fell down. Because grace hit him there. The father takes an even greater step of sacrifice to go and care for and reach his older son. A greater step of grace. And the son doesn't even recognize it. He doesn't recognize it because he's so proud. He doesn't even see his need for grace. That's the scary reality with people who can be in the house but not have the Father's heart. To you, grace seems unnecessary because you don't feel like you're that bad. And if people would just be like you and not be that bad, everything would be all right. The younger son was lost and he realized it. The younger son made a ton of mistakes. He was lost, but he realized it. And he realized in a moment that he couldn't fix himself. He couldn't bring this back together. But his father made an offer to bring him back in, and he took it. Because he realized he needed grace. But the older son, he was lost, and he rationalized it. Oh, the older son was lost, but he rationalized it. Which is interesting, because a lot of the older sons, older daughters I'm talking to today, what's interesting about being able to rationalize your sin is the fact that probably your sin is more hideable. It's easier to hide bitterness than it is reckless living, isn't it? This older son was bitter. I'm talking about bitter, you know? It's way easier to conceal bitterness than it is recklessly. Everybody gonna talk about how you was in a club. Everybody gonna talk about how you spent. Everybody gonna talk about what you did. Everybody gonna talk about all that stuff that you did that you know was wrong. But just because you can hide your bitterness doesn't make it right. Arrogance is a lot easier to hide than addiction. And so sometimes people who are in the Father's house but don't have his heart, who don't see their need for grace, they rationalize their sin. It's not that bad. My struggle isn't near as bad as their struggle. That's the reality of the older son. And then Jesus concludes this story in verse 31 and 32 in a bit of an unexpected manner, as he gets to the climax moment of this story. The father says this, "Son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is now found." The Father here continues to extend grace. He continues to. I mean, he comes out and he appeals with his son in public. All these people watching. And he's like, please come into the party. Please come. It would mean so much to me. And his son decides to make a spectacle. All these people looking and saying, I never left you. I never screwed up. I didn't go blow your money with prostitutes like that younger son of yours. And the Father, full of grace, continues to overlook the bitterness, continues to overlook the arrogance, continues to overlook the distortion of the facts and the accusations and the favoritism, and he gives no judgment, he gives no criticism, he gives no rejection, but he reaffirms his love for his son by calling him son. The word that Luke records that Jesus says is a unique word. It's a different word than the word that he's used all through the story up to this point in referring to sons. Because up to that point, he had used the word that basically meant to speak to the place in the family. But this word was a special word that communicated the love and the affection that this father has for his son. So even though full of bitterness, and arrogance, and he doesn't even get it, the Father still offers grace. But does the Son receive it? Do you receive it? Do you receive it? It really comes down to what you've done with this thing that is pride. Because pride will keep you from giving the grace you should, and pride will keep you from receiving the grace you need. Some of you are so proud spiritually that you haven't received the grace that you need because you don't even think you need it. You've been to 1,000,000 services. You've heard an incalculable amount of sermons. So many sermons that when you hear a sermon, you don't just receive the word that God has for you. You judge it as to whether or not you like it or dislike it, as to whether or not it ministered to you or not. You judge songs and services as to whether they fit your taste or not whether or not you stepped in and engaged with the power of God there in a moment. It's pride. And pride will keep you from giving the grace that you should. But pride will also keep you from receiving the grace you need. And proud religious people are the worst at giving and receiving grace. And that is not my opinion. That is actually all that Luke 15 is based upon. See, right before Jesus tells his first story in Luke 15 verses 1 and 2, set the scene for wherewith Jesus communicates this. And what verse 1 and 2 tell us is that a bunch of, we'll just call them riffraff, gather around Jesus. A bunch of people who, they had had too much to drink the night before. A bunch of people who live their lives in very questionable ways. A bunch of people who the scripture calls the worst sort of sinners were gathered around Jesus listening to him teach. And this bothered the religious elite of that day. So much so that they came to Jesus and they asked Jesus, why do you associate with such despicable and deplorable people? And in response to that question, Jesus told 3 stories. A story about a shepherd who lost the sheep, but did not stay comfortable with the 99 he had, but embraced the discomfort of going to find the one he lost. A woman who had 10 coins lost one, and rather than hold on tightly to the 9 that she had, went through the discomfort of cleaning her entire house until she located the one that she had lost. And a father who had 2 sons. One of them left, lived his life recklessly, came back home, and grace changed his life. And an older son who had never left the father's house, but never had his heart. And Jesus told this final story to a group of people who were supposed to be the shepherds who went to find that one lost sheep, who were supposed to be the people who would sweep the house to find the coin if it was lost. He told these stories, the story of the prodigal son, to a group of older sons who were supposed to plead on behalf of the father to the younger son so he wouldn't leave, who were supposed to be concerned like the father that the son had gone away, who were supposed to be a part of the celebration, who were supposed to lead the celebration when the son came home. But they didn't. They hadn't. And they wouldn't. Jesus' story that he tells here is so interesting because it has no climax. It ends just as I read, and who knows what happens. If you turn the page and get to Luke 16, Jesus is doing completely different things. We don't know what happens here after the father appeals to his son. It says, son, everything I have is yours, but we have to celebrate. We don't know what happens. Does the father go back in? Does the older son come with him now? Does the older son stay outside? Does the older son say, screw all of you, I'm taking all this, it's mine anyway, y'all can fend for yourself? We don't know. Because their response was the climax of the story. This group of older sons, a bunch of people have falsely tried to make the climax when the father comes and hugs the son. It's a beautiful moment. It's not the climax. The climax of the story is actually not there. Because the climax of the shepherd with the sheep is at the end of the story. The climax of the woman with the coins is at the end of the story. The climax of the father with the 2 sons is not there. Or is it? Is the climax their response? Is the climax your response? Jesus has identified these pious religious sinners as older sons, and now they must decide how to respond. Can I tell you something today, friend? Look, I love you. I wouldn't preach this if I didn't love you. But there are so many religious people, maybe even you watching, maybe somebody shared this video with you, maybe you're joining us at church online, and you know you're an older son. That's the way you operate. What's really true about you is you've been in the Father's house, but you do not have his heart. You think somehow you're earning what it is God gives you. You've earned your forgiveness through your goodness, your participation, your generosity. You followed all the rules. And somehow you think that's what makes you right with God. Somehow you think that's what makes you lovable. No, the Father loves you because he loves you. Because you're his son. You're his daughter. What's the first thing said about you in all humanity in the scripture? We are created in the image of God. Whether you are young or old, whether you are black, brown, or white, whatever your hair looks like or doesn't look like, how much money you have or don't have, you need to understand you are created in the image of your Father. And some of you have spent a life in the Father's house. But what's true about you right now is you don't have the Father's heart. Your heart doesn't break for people who are far from him. You're still trying to earn and prove. You wish people could just be following the rules like you. My prayer for you right now is that grace would meet you, that grace would change you. Because grace is knocking on the door. But until you tell your pride to step to the side, grace can't come in. It can't. Because grace can only come where it's recognized that it's needed. So today, this is your invitation to come home. Today, I'm talking to you, church person. I'm talking to you, person sitting there at the kitchen table with your Bible. Are you in the Father's house, but you don't have his heart? Do you need God to break your heart today for people in your world that are near to you but far from him? Do you need God to make fresh and alive in you? Maybe at some point you had his heart, but even being in his house for 30 years now has hardened your heart. Being in and around for 3 is hardened something on the inside of you. Do not be someone who lives your life in his house and does not have his heart. It's time for you to come home. And today, I want to pray for you and with you. Can we pray? Jesus, you see us. And God, maybe the reason I feel this so passionately is God has probably been so true of me so many times in my life, where I know I've been in your house, but haven't had your heart. And it's crazy how arrogant sometimes that can make you. God, I pray you soften my heart again. God, every person listening right now, every person praying with me right now, because they know what's true of them, is that they're in your house. Man, there's somebody, they serve, they may give, they may pray, they may read the Bible, but the truth is they do not have your heart. God, I pray grace would hit them right now. That your grace that changes, your grace that convicts, your grace that loves would hit them right now. And maybe for the first time in forever, your heart would come alive in them. It would beat fresh and new because they would recognize they are loved, not because they followed the rules, not because they did all the right things, but they are loved because they are your son. They are loved because they are your daughter. And they are always welcome at home. God, I love you. I thank you for your grace towards us, your patience with us. God, and I pray we would walk out of this moment transformed by you. We pray this in your name. Amen.